I was born here just like you. Don't come at me like that. Let me just live my life, okay? I'm African.
Everywhere on this planet where your phenotype exists, indigenous people suffer. Everywhere on this planet where your phenotype has settled, indigenous people want you gone. Everywhere. So you can choose to do something with that information, or you can just ignore it and say, you know what, you were born here. That's fine. Now, the fact that you were born here should not have happened. You were born here of violence, colonization.
In recent years here on the continent, we have seen an influx of descendants of colonizers fighting tooth and nail to be referred to as Africans as well. They want to be Africans so bad. You find them fighting with Africans, attempting to force them to accept them as Africans as well, even though 30 years ago, these people wanted nothing to do with the title African. They looked down on Africans and belittled them, hunted them down and unalived them just because they were Africans. They degraded Africans and their cultures. You know, all in all, 30 years ago, these descendants of colonizers were very proud Europeans. But now, they don't want to be Europeans no more. They want to be Africans.
Sad enough, it's actually getting much worse. Look at the sign, for example. We didn't make these signs. These signs were specifically made by them for them. And guess what they called themselves when they were in charge? European. But like I said, it's getting worse because now we have an influx of Afrikaans-speaking people telling other Africans that they aren't African enough. This is Trikas. You probably know the other guy, Izzy. He's the champ of the UFC middleweight division, and the reason why he's saying please win is because he wants to beat this man because of what this man said. It got so bad that even the Daily Mail had to get a take on it. Pause to see their caption because I agree. This man decided to come out and say that there are only two real African fighters and that Francis Ngannou, Israel Adesanya, and Kamaru Usman, 3 champions by the way, weren't African fighters because they weren't living on the African continent anymore. Either not noticing or not caring that Ngannou, for example, only left Cameroon because he was trying to get a better life for himself as a fighter after spending his entire childhood and a lot of his adulthood working on a sand mine. I mean, the champ in the division that he's fighting in talks vehemently about how when he was in New Zealand, he was being bullied constantly for being African and told to go back home, a place that according to Trikas isn't his home. So he's going to New Zealand and being told by British descendants that this isn't his home. And then when he goes back home, he's being told by Dutch descendants that Africa's also not his home. What the fuck? And I get it. He's trying to sell a fight. You'd think. But now look at the kind of assholes and idiots that are commenting on Izzy's comments. Look what they're saying. Only 2 fighters. And that's even confusing because here's a list of all of the active fighters in the UFC, minusing a couple like Ngannou who've now left and gone into free agency. So it's a lot more than 2. So who are these 2? Who are the 2 that Trikas mentioned and that these Afrikaners keep mentioning as the only people qualified enough to represent the African continent in the fight game? The face of Africa. Not only have they drank the Kool-Aid on who they are, making them African as it is convenient, but now they're giving themselves the authority to decide for us if we're African. Yazin, I'll just have Israel Adesanya speak for himself.
I've never questioned him as an African because, yeah, you were born in Africa or South Africa. Of course, you're an African. I've never questioned that. But who the f*** is this telling me who the f*** I am, who the f*** Maru is, who the f*** Ngannou is? I'm like, are you dumb? As a product of colonization, you're trying to tell me who the f***
I agree with the things this brother said, except for the part where he said them being born in Africa makes them African. That little statement there I don't agree with. If you are not of African descent, you are not African. It's statements like this that would over time lead to the erasure of who the true Africans actually are. So as African people, we should be very careful not to play into this game. We should make sure we are being careful and not participating in our own erasure. If you did not descend from people who are indigenous to the continent, you are not African. If anybody can be African just by being born here, if there is no longer exclusivity to the identity, then what's the point of the identity African? There is a difference between nationality and ethnicity. If I were born in Europe, that wouldn't automatically make me European. If I were born in Asia, that wouldn't make me an Asian. Now let's spell it out for those in the back who like to act and pretend like they don't understand what we are saying. If you are a white person and you were born in South Africa, yes, by virtue of you being born in South Africa, you are South African by nationality. But ethnically speaking though, you are European. The audacity of these people, though, is astronomical to tell Africans that because they are presently not living on the continent, they are not African. But you see, they won't tell that to an Asian person living outside of Asia that they are no longer Asian because they are not living on their continent. Because you see, these people have a different level of audacity and entitlement when it comes to Africa and her people. This is why we have to be very careful and not so easily invite these people in on our stuff, because give them an inch, before you know what's happening, they've taken the whole acre. I mean, for crying out loud, these people have a history of stealing, and they steal shamelessly. They steal land, they steal artifacts, and they also steal identities. These people stole the Afrikaner identity. They are presently appropriating the Afrikaner identity, even named their language Afrikaans. Now they want to steal the African identity too? Not going to happen.
My parents decided to have the nasty in South Africa, where they live, and have me, you know? And now you're calling me a colonizer. I didn't colonize shit. Okay, I was born here just like you.
I'll get to your parents in a second, but a few things first. Everywhere on this planet where your phenotype exists, Indigenous people suffer. Everywhere on this planet where your phenotype has settled, Indigenous people want you gone. Everywhere. So you can choose to do something with that information, or you can just ignore it and say, you know what, you were born here. That's fine. Now, the fact that you were born here should not have happened. You were born here of violence, colonization, right? Your parents remained here because a system was put in place through violence, through colonization, that made it legal for you to stay here. A system that Indigenous people did not approve of and has never favored them, and has never benefited them as well. So the legality around you being here and staying here has nothing to do with Indigenous people, because we did not agree to this. We did not consent to this. So now you're saying you're not a colonizer because you didn't colonize any place. This is where I blame your parents. Because where you are born is not controlled by you. But what you do with what you know where you are born is everything. And the fact that you are this ignorant, I blame on your parents. So this can be the start of a journey towards educating yourself about colonization, how you've benefited from it just by your skin color, or you can stay ignorant like your parents have allowed up to this point. So, granted, there are many white people all over the planet who fight for Indigenous rights. There's a reason they do this. You can educate yourself as to the reasons they do this, or you can just stay another ignorant white person. So what I would do if I were you is I would chalk the last 19 years and blame it on your parents allowing you to grow up in this bubble of privilege where you don't know anything about your history, you don't understand why we say you are privileged, and you don't understand why people call you a colonizer. You can blame your parents for all that. But from this point onward, what are you going to do with what you now know? What are you going to do with the fact that all over the planet where colonization has happened, Indigenous people still want white people gone? What are you going to do with the fact that all over the planet where settlers are, on average, they are always doing better than Indigenous people? Why do you think that is? And why do you think that so many countries are still sitting destabilized, even though colonization ended so long ago? Who do you think is perpetuating colonization? Who do you think is continuing the legacy that colonization created? Because as you say, all the colonizers are gone, but how is it that their descendants are still benefiting from what was done?
I mean, these people can complain all day, talk about how they weren't alive during colonization, they weren't colonizers, and that we should stop calling them colonizers. For me, it's very simple. If you descend from colonizers, you are a colonizer. If you profit from colonization, you are a colonizer. And if you act like your colonizer forefathers, you are a colonizer. If it looks like a dog and quacks like a dog, it's a dog.
Like, even on my other TikToks, I've been being called a colonizer. How? What did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. Let me just live my life, okay? I'm African.
Oh, you've done plenty wrong. And you start off by not understanding the fact and the thing that us Indigenous people keep telling you about white people and pale people. You're not hearing us. We've been telling you this for thousands of years, okay? You guys are not us. You're not us, okay? You can be born in my same house. It doesn't make you my family. You're an outsider. You're not us, okay? Just because you're born somewhere doesn't mean you're that. That's the white conqueror usurping mentality. And we're going to put an end to that. We got to stop this because these white people have done this for too long. It's ending it. It's done now. It's stopping. All around the world, all over the world, we're stopping pale people from talking like this. And even the pale Arabs. Because they're trying to usurp by talking like this, that they're born someplace and now that they're there. This is what they're trying to do with North Africa, and they're trying to whiten North Africa and say that North Africa is pale Arabs and Europeans, and not black Africans. This is the same mentality. This is what we're fighting against. These devils that think like this. Oh, I was born in South Africa. Now I'm South African. No, you're not. Your genetics begin in Central Europe, okay? If you don't know it, stop lying to the people. Get an education.
According to Indigenous South Africans, they do not even speak any of the Indigenous South African languages. That's how much they do not vibe with and associate with Africans and their culture. They don't even acknowledge or respect the people and their culture, but they want them to accept them and identify them as African. You don't respect their opinions, thoughts, and feelings, but you want them to accept you and identify you as African. Till date, you still treat them like shit, but you want them to accept you and identify you as African. Is the fact that they are not even asking us to accept them as Africans. They are forcing us to accept them as Africans. The audacity. But guys, what are your thoughts? Let's continue this conversation down below in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.